Okay. I squeal siem na sietya. I na squalawan kawana silam nala. We respectfully acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Coatsan people where we live, learn, and play. I'll ask for a motion to adopt the agenda. Moved by Trustee Thorne, seconded by Trustee DeGroot. All those in favor? Motion carries. Moving to Superintendent of Schools, Robin Gray.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to present our framework for enhancing student learning this evening. This report is expected by all districts from the ministry with regard to the fact that this is a ministerial order with regard to strategic planning and to have a report for the purpose for the Ministry of Education to review, as well as, I believe, a document for public accountability. And so in front of you and in your package, you will see a report that is approximately 10 pages. Now, it is 10 pages due to the fact that that's what is expected from the ministry. And it's also expected to be put on our website as well as a link to our strategic plan. So this is part of our strategic planning process to support our learners. And so within this document, there has to be evidence of a continuous review cycle. There also has to be evidence for student outcomes in the intellectual, human, and social and career area, as well as there has to be results with regard to our Indigenous learners, children in care, as well as students with diverse abilities. And then an evaluation of the impacts of our strategies overall. And of course, it has to be again published for public consumption within our community. So you'll see in front of you the first page, and thank you very much to our Secretary Treasurer for managing the document for me. But you will see the first page really is around from the board. All signatures would be expected, and I think that if the board approves this report going to the ministry, we'd be looking at your signatures. And I know that this front page has been reviewed by our board chair. And I think the most important point here would be that it really discusses our context. It also looks at our journey towards reconciliation and equity in terms of how we support our learners. And it also showcases on the side here the foundational documents that we used with regard to building that strategic plan. And it is certainly around educating and using the document of the educated citizen, First People's Principles of Learning, and also the OECD report of 2030, and then the BC Tripartite Educational Agreements, the UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and also the Truth and Reconciliation report. And please, at any time, if you have questions, I'm certainly happy to answer them. And then as we move on to the third page, the ministry expects to showcase how we engage with our partners and how we built our strategic plan. And you can see on the side, we went through a process about 1.5 years ago in terms of engaging with our community. And I think that we can be proud, the board can be proud at how they actually worked with our community, our students, our parents, our community leaders, as well as our general overall community, and indeed our Indigenous communities as well. And so we have developed a strategic plan that's beyond education. And you can see that the 3 visionary questions that we asked our community was with regard to what type of world do you hope to create? What skills and attitudes do you need to thrive in this world? And how do we help you get there? And so a very strong strategic plan that was built in 2020 and moving on to 2024. And so in this report, we have to showcase how overall our students are doing, and we have to use quantitative data as well as we've incorporated some qualitative stories. So you can see in this report on page 5 within your package, it really showcases how we are doing with regard to our FSA in terms of reading proficiency, numeracy proficiency, and participation. I do want to acknowledge this is an area that we certainly looked at increasing participation rates. Last year or the year before, we only had 32% of our student population participating in foundation skills assessment at the grade 4 and 7 level. And as of last year, through a concerted effort, we were able to actually have a 70% participation rates, which really helps us to look at these data points and certainly provide those resources and supports that our students need overall. I think that one thing that I could comment on in the middle of the page here, it talks about that the first time grade 12 graduation rate has been trending down for the last 5 years. And so that's something that we want to take a look at. And I think that this is one of the reasons that the ministry has asked all districts to look at this type of report so that we can actually align our resources to support how we're doing overall. And so we can see that on the side, just a bit of a snapshot, 72% of our grade 4s are at reading proficiency, 60% at grade 7. If you look at the numeracy proficiency, it certainly is down at 50% for grade 4s, and of course 40% for grade 7. So you can see, I think that our commitment is really what we're looking to achieve here is what are we doing to support our learners overall? And so you can see that the board certainly put a concerted effort in terms of investing in some additional staffing. We've hired a district principal of instruction and innovation to focus specifically on developing the literacy and the numeracy K-12 frameworks. We also are putting in some literacy specialist teachers in schools where further supports are needed. We're certainly looking at developing those literacy plans that I made comment to already. We're also looking at how do we effectively teach reading. We know that with regard to research, we know far more today than we would have known 10 to 20 years ago. And so we want to certainly incorporate that into the realm of our educators. And so a number of things are certainly occurring with regard to supporting our learners. Moving on to the next page, we used data points with regard to our student learning surveys. And so all of our students in grade 4, 7, 10, and 12, there's a number of questions that they would look at around the student learning survey. So we've pulled out some relevant ones here to put in our report. And so you can see on the left-hand side here, one of the questions would be, do students feel welcome and safe at their school? And so there's an average there of 70%. Do students feel a sense of belonging at their school? Well, there's an average of 50%. Now you could break out those pieces, but I think overall, this is generally where we're at. And then of course, here's a comment from staff. Staff indicate that they are confident in creating culturally responsive environments where all students and staff feel safe and welcome. So you can see that there's different voices in the student learning survey, as well as an opportunity for parents to respond as well. And so we've pulled out some of that data, and I think that it's data that we know we need to focus on, we need to look at, we need to decipher, we need to work with our schools. And so as you're well aware, our school plans, they also align and look at some of this data, and they develop their school plans from this particular evidence. I do want to make a comment though on the last paragraph on the page before. Thank you, Jason. You can see that there's been a number of supports for career education. And I think that it's at the very last sentence, it talks about that for the last 3 years of our district, it has been recognized by ITA for leading the province for the numbers of youth apprenticeships. So you can see in the career area, we've done a number of initiatives that have actually raised that profile and opportunities for our learners. And then if you move on to where we've had to break out how well our Indigenous learners performing, you can see that on the side, on the left-hand side, we've used our FSA data, and it's rather shocking. And it's shocking in a way that we do know we need to actually put those resources to our learners who are on reserve. And there's such a discrepancy with students who are on reserve in our grade 7 results around reading proficiency, as well as our 6-year graduation rate. So that is certainly an area that we have put our attention to and certainly have some commitments with regard to supporting our learners. I think that along this process that we will need to be looking at how do we create our own measurement tools with regard to how we're doing. And so down the center of this page, you will see that there was our own data set that was created last year. And so we looked at asking our schools how well our Indigenous learners are doing. Are they in the green zone? Are they doing fine? Are they in the yellow zone? Do they have some challenges? Do they need some support? And then are they in the red zone? Do we need a lot of support that's needed? And you can see there in our own data set that we were able to look at last year and put in place that 15% of our Indigenous students made positive improvement within the above scale in academic development. And then you can see going down, 21% made positive improvement within the above scale in their attendance at school. And then of course, 27% of our Indigenous students made a positive improvement within the above scale in their social emotional development. And so that's our own data that we've collected. And as you're aware, as a board, there have been a number of supports that have been put in place for our Indigenous learners with regard to some of the work that we're doing in Indigenous ed. But down below at the very bottom, you can see that there are a number of things that we've put in place. 3 additional Indigenous outreach teachers. We've expanded the SOUTNs, which are our youth and family counselor support, where we have these roles and personnel. They follow students grade to grade, school to school, to support them through some of those transitions. And we've also are putting into a place a mobile classroom to support some of our Indigenous learners through outreach. And again, we really want to focus on how do we bring in Indigenous community role models to share with our learners in school opportunities that may come, that they can vision out for their own future. And then we have this great Indigenous Parent Council that's an offshoot of DPAC. And then again, we continue to focus on our Indigenous knowledge sessions and Hulkamina for Kids. But within our operational plan, there are a number of actions and strategies that we are working on as a team at the district level that we are operationalizing. And then if you move on to our diverse learners, and so we had to break out this information, and you can see the FSA results for our diverse learners. And these would be students who have official designations. And so we were able to pull out that information. And then it also looks at some of the programs and the initiatives that we are doing to support our diverse learners. But it really certainly indicates the work that we have to do as a district, because I think that once you actually start to track some of this data, we have further participation around FSA. It really highlights the area that we have to work on and how do we align our resources to support student learning overall. Because until you pay attention to it, you can do all kinds of beautiful programs for kids, but is it supporting their learning overall around those foundational skills? And then moving on to supporting children in care, we have a number of areas that we focus on. The COM curriculum that's in our primary level. It was in our K in grade 1 level, but now we've expanded it to grade 2 and 3. We've also looked at everyday anxiety strategies for our educators in our EASE program. We have a number of things going on around understanding behavior and supporting highly reactive children. And of course, our trauma-informed nonviolent crisis intervention that is taught to all of our staff, and we go through that process of such. I think that what I'd like to highlight here is that when you look under social emotional learning and mental wellness, you'll see that all secondary schools will continue developing a mental health plan informed by their survey data collected from the students, parents, and staff. And that's making reference to that student learning survey. And then again, also, how do we support our students around interventions? And that's something that we're continuing to work on. Then moving along, we have to show to the ministry how we are supporting and reviewing this work. And so you can see that we have our data-driven planning, and this report is part of that. But we do have our operational plans that have been put in place with a number of actions that are some heavy lifting with regard to supporting our learners. We have our other plans that we have in place now. Some are in draft, but for the most part, they are ready to go. And those are our operations, human resources, finance, technology, and communications. And all of our schools have aligned their school plans to our strategic plans and our actions that we have within them. And then you can see at the very end here of the report, it's a year at a glance. And how do we actually look at our data? How do we track our data? And when do we look at it? And so I think this is something that we as a district we're probably in our infancy. We have to do a little bit more work around how do we actually look at this data throughout the school year? How do we think in terms of how do we support our learners, and what do we need to do next in order to support them? But within our strategic plan, you'll know, and I know that many of you do, that there's a real focus around the learning aspect, and that's around our foundational skills around literacy and numeracy. And if we can build those skills in the early years, we know that we can support our learners overall as we move them throughout their learning opportunities, where they can look at some of their passions in the middle years, and they can be looking at diving into an area that they're looking at for their future after graduation. So that is our report to the ministry, and I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Trustees have questions or comments? Trustee Kemmler? Your mic, Trustee Kemmler.
Think by meeting 4, I'd have it together. Anyway, on page 8, where we're talking about diverse learners, on the sidebar where it says FSA results, it says FSA results for Aboriginal learners. Is that correct, or should that be like that?
Thank you very much. You found the one error, I'm sure, Trustee Kemmler.
Oh, okay, wow.
That should not say Indigenous learners.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments from trustees? Trustee Croft?
I just, as we move into providing or to be more involved in early learning, I'm surprised that this doesn't ask for the relationship between EDI and literacy. Is that an important aspect at this level of reporting, or will it be someday?
It's something through the, sorry.
Yep.
Through the chair.
Yep.
Certainly. EDI comes to us every 3 years. And so when we look at that data, we did not bring this into the report, but it is certainly something that our early years table does look at. So even though it may not be reflected in this particular document, it is certainly something that is still looked at.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I just have one. There are a number of reports to be included with this, and I know the finance report is here later on in the agenda. Have we seen all of those reports that would be attached?
Are you making reference to the supporting plans in the review cycle?
The list of report areas that need to be included is finance and technology and HR. I've forgotten all of the areas. I've got to find it here. I know it's listed somewhere.
It is on page 10.
Page 10. Okay.
And some of those, they will not be necessarily sent to the ministry, those reports. They
Oh,
are the responsibility of the board to ensure that they are part of the review cycle. And so what they only ask from us would be a 10-page report along with a link to the strategic plan. All of those plans that are listed here, some have been reviewed by the board, and there's a couple that have not been brought to the board. One in particular is the finance report, and that is certainly being done. It would have been one of the last ones that were required as we work toward supporting all of the plans that are generally here. But I can see that we have the Secretary Treasurer with his hand raised.
Mr. Sandquist.
The report that's on the agenda is not the multi-year financial plan. The work that we did over the summer has changed significantly with the enrollment numbers that will come in September, and it needs to be completely redone. So we'll be starting that process to update it as soon as the 1701 is in, because it looks at 3 years of forecasts and financial projections, and they're influenced by student numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Not quite ready yet.
Superintendent?
Yes, thank you. There are 2 of these 3-year plans that the board has not seen yet, and that would be the operations as well as the finance. And so I think that those are the 2 that have not been presented to the board in a draft state. And so that has yet to happen.
Okay, but when we submit the report, it's just the 10-page document that you've just reviewed with us?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. So there is a suggested motion there. Is there a mover for the motion to approve the vessel. Trustee DeGroot and seconded by Trustee Thorn. Is there any debate on the motion that we approve the framework for enhancing student learning report? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries. Just want to comment on the report itself. What a massive undertaking. Thank you to staff for doing that. I know it will be helpful as we work toward strategies to improve our student outcomes, but it is certainly a marathon of work. So thank you to all involved. Okay, moving to Secretary Treasurer.
Thank you. And we are going to be reviewing the school district's financial statements for 2020, 2021. So we'll invite Darren Freer from Baker Tilly, Victoria into our meeting, and Aaron Egeland, Associate Secretary Treasurer from the gallery into our meeting. Okay, so I welcome Darren and Aaron. And before Darren begins with his presentation, I have a few acknowledgements and would also like to draw your attention to a new financial report this year, which is a financial statement discussion and analysis, which is included in your package. This new reporting requirement is designed to provide the reader of our financial statements with an analysis of the financial performance of the school district. And it's intended to make a connection between the decisions of the board and actual board performance. As this is our first attempt at linking the financial performance to the strategic plan, it certainly took us a lot of time to prepare. It's very detailed, so I'd like to thank Aaron and Mike, who assisted and myself, who assisted me in the preparation of this document. And it is required to be submitted to the ministry following the adoption of the financial statements. So it's new. I will briefly bring it onto the screen. It is, I think it's an exciting read as to what happened within our school district. And you can look at our financial statements and see a story. Instead of seeing a capital number, what did the board buy? Instead of wondering why there's a variance between two accounts, why did it happen? I mean, it's all explained for you here in this document full of charts of enrollment, how we've been trending with our student numbers. Of course, this will look different next year. Our strategic plan, I'm going through very quickly because we could spend a lot of time on this, but I know this is more about the actual financial statements. It goes through all of our various schedules, and we tried to make this not a technical document, as many of them are around the province, where they're just charts and they're black and white, and nobody would ever have any interest in reading it unless you were an accountant interested in statistics and analytical review. But we tried to make it visual and tie connections into stories, links to Check TV article coverage, financial highlights in detail for you. What did the board do with the safe return to fund class money, as an example? Where's the surplus been over the years? And you'll see, you're going to learn that it's higher than it has been, and there's reasons for that we're going to be going through here now. And then each of the various statements. So I just wanted to draw this to your attention. I could spend an hour or more going through it. I do encourage anybody to read it, as it does, anybody actually to read it. It probably makes more sense in our financial statements to anybody who's interested in school district finances. And it's our first attempt, and we're quite proud of it. I'd also, before Darren starts, like to send my thanks to our full school district financial team. Everything that happens in the finance department over the year ends up on these statements, consolidated into these numbers, but there's a lot of work that goes behind it. Big thanks to Karen and Aaron, who led the accounting and payroll departments over the summer months to ensure the statements were accurate and ready for presentation. We also had some changes to personnel, so I'll extend my thanks to all, which is Karen, Aaron, Carrie, Laura, Brianne, Lisa, Naomi, Heather, Alicia, and Claire, which And I'll throw in Dave and Louise from procurement as well, because their work ends up linking in here as well. And thank you to the board for continuing to monitor the district's financial position and implementing policies and practices that ensure sound fiscal management. And thank you to the auditors for their work, who come to our site a couple times a year and are now here to present their findings of these statements. Financial statements provide information to the reader about the school district's financial performance, and in this case, for the school year ended June 30th, 2021. And the purpose of an audit is to provide assurance to the reader that the information that we prepared is correct. So somebody independently has reviewed it, and you can rely within a degree of certainty that it accurately reflects the operations of the school district. So it was a very unusual year, and Darren will do most of the talking around the variances, but I would like, just to highlight that when we began the budget cycle in April of 2020, we had no idea what our school year was going to look like. We were 1 month into a pandemic, and we were trying to budget without understanding the full context of what that was going to mean and how long that was going to go on, what sort of funding was going to come to assist. And so the variances compare to that actual financial performance compares to those actual balances from last April, 2 Aprils ago, actually. Funding was received in August and September of approximately 3.7 million to assist with the COVID restart. Most of that was spent. There's very small amounts that are carrying over. And you'll find when Darren goes over the surplus that the financial position that the board was in at the close of last school year, an unrestricted surplus, is almost the same as it's in right now at the close of this school year. So the last 2 school years have ended in almost the same place. So through all of that uncertainty and turmoil and funding variances of some accounts being overspent and some underspent, it all worked out pretty even. And with that, I'll pass to Darren, who will give you his presentation.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Are you able to put up the financial statements, Jason? Are you able to share that with everybody?
Yes.
And then I'll refer to a couple of the pages. I'd like to start with the auditor's report when you get there. Okay, great. So this, everybody, is what we our independent auditor's report. This is our report addressed to you, the board. And you'll note that a couple of years ago, you may remember the format looked a little different. 2 years ago, the professional standards changed, the audit report. Contents changed a little bit. I'll walk you through those. But the bottom line is it's what we call a clean opinion, and it's a clean opinion, and it starts out here with the opinion. You'll see basis for opinion partway down. It then moves into, and then if Jason, if you could flip the page, there's a statement discussing our independence, and an enhanced description of both management and the auditor's responsibilities. Our report here also states that the district has prepared their financial statements in accordance with the accounting requirements of section 23.1 of the Budget Transparency and Accountability Act of the province of BC. And it also states that the financial statements are the responsibility of board's management, and that our responsibility as auditors is to express an opinion on the financial statement based on our audit, which we have done. Okay. So what I would like to do is walk everybody through the financial statements, in particular two of the statements which highlight the year. So if you could turn, Jason, please, to Schedule 2. Oh, there it is. And I'd like us to focus on that middle column, the bolded one. And you'll see there this schedule, by the way, is called the Schedule of Operating Operations. It details the operations of the year for the district. And you'll note partway down, the surplus for the year is 1.367 million. And when added to the opening surplus of 5.14, where we started or where we were at last year at this time, there's a total surplus at the end of the year of 6.507 million. I'm right near the bottom of that page in the middle column there. And of this, the district has restricted or spoken for $4.1 million in the coming year, leaving an unrestricted surplus at the end of the year of $2.4 million. And you'll note that is very, very similar to where we were last year at this time. You'll see the comparative column just to the right of that number is $2.3 million. So as Jason said a few minutes ago, a year filled with many ups and downs, which we'll talk about in a moment, resulted in a very similar outcome.
And Darren, I think I'll just step in here as well on the internally restricted number. I mean, you can see that that is quite a bit larger, and you may wonder particularly why it's so much larger than the year before. And the main reason would be due to a number of funds that arrived in June that were unable to be expended. Grant funding, what they would have called holdback funding that came back to the board, and it all needed to be carried over into the next fiscal. And in the notes to the financial statements, you can find the details of what makes up those numbers.
Okay, thank you, Jason. I'd like to also point out that again this year, you'll note that the $2.4 million unrestricted surplus is within the board's policy of having a contingency of somewhere between 1% and 3% of operating expenditures. And the 2.4 million came in at approximately 2.7%. So within the bookends of the 1% and the 3%. At the top of this page, you'll see the revenue section, and you'll see there that part of the equation results in total actual revenue of 88.75 million. So I'm near the top in the middle, partway down there, the 88.7. You'll note the comparative, the budget just to the left of that is 87.4. So ultimately the revenues came in a little higher than budget and up from the $87.1 million spent last year. This was a 1.8% increase in revenue versus last year, and it's the result of a couple of different things. Largely the increased dollars per student received, the funding received for salary increases, which were then offset by a decrease in overall student numbers, and a decrease in international tuition. Okay. Continuing down to the next section, the expense side of the equation, you'll see there's $87.2 million spent on a budget of just over 89 million. And so what I'd like to do here is just flip to Schedule 2B, which further breaks down these numbers. And it groups, this schedule here groups all the various functions together, for example, in instruction, maintenance, transportation together, and groups all the similar expenses within those functions together. So it gives us a snapshot of where the district spent its money during the year. The first item at the very top, again, I'm gonna highlight the middle column. It's bolded, you'll see.
Okay.
You'll see the teachers is by far the biggest line item, the teacher salary expense of 35.9 million. And that is a little above the amount spent in the prior year and over budget. However, these figures correlate with the salary increase during the year and tie in with the enrollment decrease and a slight decrease in the number of teachers, offset, of course, by the always changing staff mix. The next item is principals and vice principals. You'll see $5.7 million spent. that was over 2020 levels and a little over budget as well. Again, 2021 incorporated a slight decrease in FTEs in this area, and however, there was a salary increase. Educational assistance, the next line, you'll see $7.4 million spent there. And you'll note an increase over the prior year, however, just under budget. The reason there is there was an increase in special needs students this year, which resulted in more EAs. And again, there was a salary change, or salary changes were made as well in that area. Next up is support staff. Support staff salaries is under budget and over 2020 results. The reason there is there was a wage increase during the year in this line item as well. Other professionals was at 2.2 million. It's consistent with budget, slightly over last year's total spent. And again, changes were as a result of wage increases in this area and are consistent with the regional salary model. And the last item in the salary section, by far the largest component of the district's expenditures, is substitutes. And you'll see that the 2021 results are under budget, but above 2020 actual amounts spent. Again, there was a salary increase in this area during the year. However, it is really hard to compare 2021 with 2020 as there were reduced substitute activity in the spring of 2020 when COVID began, particularly as most of the instruction at that point was online during that initial COVID. Next up is employee benefits. Benefits this year over the prior year, slightly under budget. And the results are as expected, as salaries are up, as are the various benefit rates. And lastly, you'll see services and supplies, $8.1 million spent on a budget of 8.6. So we're noting under budget this year and under the prior year. And the theme noticed here, less spending incurred during the current year, as Jason alluded to earlier. With COVID being around for the full year, there's less professional development, less travel, and as well, insurance expense was down this year. There were 5 insurance claims paid out, or deductibles paid in the prior year, and only 2 this year. Offsetting these decreases was an increase in utilities versus last year, which makes sense because remember last year, most people were working from home in the spring anyway. So overall, total operating expenses this year, 87.2 million. I'm in the middle column at the very bottom now on a budget of 89.0 million. And in conclusion, I'd just like to note that it really was a year of ups and downs as I tried to sort of walk through. As you can sort of get the feeling, there's a lot of things moving. I mean, we're in a pandemic and there was a lot of bobbing and weaving. But the actual results really, at the end of the day, really closely parallel budget, resulting in a $2.4 million unrestricted surplus. So thank you.
Thank you, Darren. And going back to Secretary Treasurer, do you have any comments for us as well?
No, I don't have any. I don't think I have any closing comments. I did them all at the beginning. It was a really unique year. It was a very difficult year to project through. I believe that as we got close to the year end, we were projecting that our surplus would be reasonably healthy because we could start to see that some of the staffing costs weren't going to be fully expended. certainly areas of travel, we began to bring those into our surplus projections. We knew those weren't going to be fully expended. And I think we're in a good place to start the new school year as a starting point in our budget. And you'll see when you review the 3-year financial plan, how quickly that surplus can be utilized in the next couple of years to deal with some of the cost pressures that are coming our way. So it does set us up well to assist in future budgeting challenges.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the flexibility and nimbleness of the district, both through the superintendent and secretary treasurer. It was a really challenging year, and it's obvious that you've helped us go through it in a really good way. So thank you. And thank you for your information, Darren, and for the audit. Always appreciate your work and your staff, obviously. So thank you. So we do have a suggested motion that we adopt the 2020-2021 financial statements. Is there a mover? Trustee Thorne and Trustee Doman. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. So we're moving to a motion to adjourn. Moved by Trustee DeGroot, seconded by Trustee Doman. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.